The morning of April 12th, 1943, 30,000 feet above the German industrial heartland, Staff Sergeant Robert Henderson pressed his face against the eyepiece of the most secret device in the American arsenal. Through crosshairs etched onto a lens, he watched the Focke-Wulf factory near Bremen drift into perfect alignment. The wind at altitude screamed past the plexiglass nose of his B-17 flying fortress, creating a constant roar that vibrated through his chest. His breath condensed in the frigid air, crystallizing on the rubber eyepiece. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. The temperature outside hovered at -25 degrees Fahrenheit. Inside the aircraft, despite his electrically heated suit, Henderson could barely feel his fingers. His gloved hand rested on the release mechanism of a 50-pound analog computer that the United States had spent over $1 billion to develop. A device so classified that Henderson had sworn an oath to destroy it with his own life if necessary. A machine that propaganda claimed could drop a bomb into a pickle barrel from 20,000 feet. The Norden Bombsight, America's miracle weapon, the technological edge that would win the war through precision rather than savagery. The answer to strategic bombing that would allow the United States to destroy Germany's ability to wage war without descending into the indiscriminate slaughter that had characterized the British night raids. Henderson's B-17 flying fortress steadied on its final approach. Below him, stretched across 2 miles of formation flying, 43 other bombers maintained their positions. Each carried a bombardier with an identical Norden bombsight. Each bombardier had been trained for months on the device's operation. Each had been told they wielded a weapon that would change the nature of warfare itself. The bombsight's gyroscopes whirred beneath Henderson's hands, a high-pitched mechanical symphony that he had learned to interpret like a musician reading sheet music. Its mechanical calculator churned through wind speed, altitude, airspeed, and the ballistic trajectory of the 500-pound bombs nestled in the bay below. This was the promise of modern warfare, surgical strikes that would cripple Germany's ability to fight without the indiscriminate slaughter that had defined warfare for millennia. American bombers would not carpet-bomb cities like the British. They would not kill women and children. They would strike factories, rail yards, oil refineries, ball-bearing plants, military targets, industrial targets. The machinery of war rather than the people operating it. The Norden made this promise possible, or so Henderson had been told. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. Henderson's training had been exhaustive. 6 months at Bombardier School, learning the mathematics of ballistic trajectories, the physics of bombs falling through air, the meteorology of high-altitude winds. Then, another 3 months specifically on the Norden, learning its intricate mechanisms, its calibration procedures, its quirks and requirements. He had practiced on bombing ranges in New Mexico, dropping practice bombs on targets painted in the desert. Under those ideal conditions, clear skies, no flak, no fighters, no combat stress, Henderson had achieved remarkable accuracy. Hits within 200 feet were routine. Hits within 100 feet were common. But this was not New Mexico. This was the sky above Bremen, and the Focke-Wulf factory below was surrounded by some of the most concentrated anti-aircraft defences in Europe. Black puffs of flak burst around the formation, each explosion representing 88mm shells designed to shred aircraft. German fighters, Messerschmitt 109s and Focke-Wulf 190s, circled at a distance, waiting for bombers to fall out to formation. Henderson's aircraft shuddered as nearby flak explosions buffeted it with concussive force. He made final adjustments to the bombsight. The device had taken control of the aircraft through its autopilot linkage. The pilot, Lieutenant James Morrison, sat with his hands hovering near the controls, but not touching them, trusting a mechanical device to fly his aircraft through the most dangerous moments of the mission. Morrison hated this part. Every instinct screamed at him to take evasive action, to jink and weave away from the flak bursts. But the Norden required stable flight. Any deviation would ruin the calculation. Henderson watched the factory crawl closer in his sight. The crosshairs centered on what the briefing had identified as the main assembly building. His finger tightened on the release. The Norden's computer finished its calculations. The bombs released. 13 seconds later, through the haze of industrial smoke and the chaos of exploding flak, Henderson watched his ordnance detonate, not on the factory, not even close to the factory. Nearly a quarter-mile from the target, his bombs cratered open fields and destroyed several residential structures on the factory's periphery. Across the formation, other bombardiers experienced similar results. Some bombs fell closer, some fell farther. The formation dropped approximately 43,000 pounds of high-explosive ordnance in the general vicinity of the Focke-Wulf factory. Post-mission reconnaissance would later reveal that less than 15% of the bombs fell within 1,000 feet of the aim point. The factory sustained moderate damage but remained operational. It would be fully functional again within 2 weeks. Across the German border, men like Luftwaffe technical analyst Major Wilhelm Kröger watched American bombers day after day, bombing run after bombing run. They had been waiting for the Americans to unleash their secret weapon, the device, their intelligence. Services had warned, would revolutionize aerial warfare. German military intelligence had been tracking the Norden's development since the early 1930s. They knew the Americans considered it their most important military secret. They had read reports of testing that suggested extraordinary accuracy. They had intercepted communications that referenced pickle-barrel precision. Instead, Kröger saw something entirely different. He saw bombs scattered across German cities like seeds thrown by a careless farmer. He saw entire formations missing targets by margins that made precision bombing a cruel joke. He documented these observations in reports that flowed up through Luftwaffe intelligence channels. The American bomb sight, whatever its theoretical capabilities, was not performing as advertised under actual combat conditions. The scatter patterns Kröger observed were consistent with bomb sites achieving circular error probables of over 1,000 feet, sometimes exceeding a quarter-mile. And perhaps most importantly, Kröger knew something the American bombardiers did not. The Norden bombsight had no secrets left to protect. German intelligence had possessed complete plans for the device since November 1937, before a single American bomber had entered European airspace, before Pearl Harbor, before the United States had even entered the war. The Germans had not merely stolen the plans. They had built working copies. They had tested them extensively. They had compared the Norden to their own Lot Fenro 7 bombsight in controlled conditions. The Germans knew exactly what the Norden could and could not do, and what they knew would have shattered every illusion the American military had built around their miracle device. They knew that under ideal testing conditions, the Norden could achieve impressive accuracy. They also knew that under combat conditions, it performed no better than Germany's own simpler, cheaper bombsight. They knew the Norden was over-engineered, difficult to maintain, prone to calibration drift, and sensitive to the temperature extremes and vibrations inherent in combat operations. Most devastatingly, they knew that the elaborate American security apparatus protecting the Norden was protecting a device whose secrets Germany had possessed for 6 years. This is the story of the greatest disconnect between promise and performance in World War II military technology. The story of how 75-foot accuracy in testing became 1,200-foot errors in combat. The story of propaganda so effective that even those using the weapon believed myths their enemies had already dismissed as impractical. The story of how the Germans never truly feared America's most protected secret because they had tested it, evaluated it, and decided their own simpler bombsight worked just as well. This is the story of how an entire strategic bombing doctrine was built on technological foundations that German intelligence knew were far less stable than American planners believed. The origins of American precision bombing doctrine began not with technology, but with philosophy and the trauma of World War I. In the aftermath of the Great War, American military theorists confronted a moral and strategic crisis that would shape military thinking for decades. The trenches of France had consumed an entire generation of European men. Millions had died in grinding attrition warfare that gained mere miles of territory at costs that defied comprehension. The Battle of the Somme alone had produced over 1 million casualties. Verdun had killed 700,000 men fighting over a salient of negligible strategic value. American military thinkers, particularly within the nascent Army Air Corps, believed there must be a better way to wage war. The concept of strategic bombing offered an alternative, a way to win wars by destroying an enemy's capacity to fight rather than killing its soldiers and safe mass on battlefields. If you could destroy the factories producing weapons, the refineries producing fuel, the transportation networks moving supplies, you could render an enemy incapable of fighting without the mass slaughter of trench warfare. This was not merely a military theory, it was a moral argument about how civilized nations should conduct war. But this doctrine required something that did not yet exist in the early 1920s: the ability to hit specific targets from altitudes high enough to avoid anti-aircraft fire. Dropping bombs from aircraft was easy. Hitting anything specific was extraordinarily difficult. A bomb dropped from 10,000 feet took approximately 25 seconds to reach the ground. During that time, the aircraft traveled nearly a mile. Wind could push the bomb hundreds of feet off course. Temperature, air density, and the ballistic characteristics of different bomb types all affected trajectory in complex ways. Early bomb sights were little more than mechanical calculators that required bombardiers to estimate these variables and release bombs based on rough calculations. Enter Carl Lucas van Norden, a Dutch engineer who emigrated to the United States in 1904. Norden represented the type of immigrant talent that would become crucial to American military technology throughout the 20th century. Born in Java, educated in Switzerland, he arrived in America with sophisticated training in engineering and physics. He initially found work with Elmer Sperry, another immigrant engineer who was revolutionizing naval technology through the application of gyroscopic stabilization. Sperry's company was developing gyroscopes that could stabilize ships, improve compass accuracy, and provide platforms for various instruments that needed to remain level, regardless of a vessel's motion. Norden worked on these projects, learning the intricacies of gyroscopic technology. But Norden and Sperry clashed personality-wise. In 1913, Norden left to establish his own company. He maintained relationships with the United States Navy, serving as a consultant on various projects. By 1920, the Navy had contracted Norden to develop a bomb sight that could solve the fundamental problem of aerial bombing. The Navy's interest was not primarily strategic. They envisioned using bombers to attack enemy fleets, particularly capital ships like battleships and aircraft carriers. Hitting a moving ship from altitude required extraordinary precision. Existing bomb sights were inadequate for this mission. Norden accepted the challenge, beginning a development process that would consume the next decade. A bomb dropped from an aircraft moving at 200 miles per hour at 20,000 feet travels not in a straight line, but along a parabolic arc influenced by multiple variables. Wind speed and direction at various altitudes affect horizontal drift. Air density affects terminal velocity. Temperature affects air density. The bomb's weight, shape, and even its rotation affect its ballistic trajectory. Earlier bomb sights required bombardiers to manually calculate these variables using tables, charts, and slide rules. This process was prone to human error and too slow for the dynamic conditions of actual combat, where winds changed, aircraft maneuvered, and targets moved. Norden's innovation combined three technologies into one integrated system, creating something fundamentally new. First, a gyroscopically stabilized platform that kept the sight aimed at a fixed point on the ground, regardless of aircraft movement. This platform used precision gyroscopes, spinning at high speeds, to maintain a stable reference even as the aircraft pitched, rolled, and yawed. The gyroscopes were housed in gimbals that allowed them to remain oriented to the Earth's gravity, regardless of the aircraft's attitude. This stabilization was crucial, because even small errors in the sight's orientation could produce dramatic miss at high altitudes. Second, an analog computer that continuously recalculated the bomb's trajectory based on changing flight conditions. This was the Norden's revolutionary feature. Rather than requiring the bombardier to perform calculations before the bomb run and then hope conditions remained stable, the Norden's mechanical computer constantly updated its solution. As wind speed changed, as the aircraft's speed varied, as altitude fluctuated, the computer automatically adjusted the release point. The computer consisted of gears, cams, and mechanical linkages that performed differential equations through physical motion. It was, in essence, a mechanical brain that solved calculus problems in real time. Third, and perhaps most revolutionary, a mechanical linkage to the aircraft's autopilot that allowed the bombsight itself to fly the aircraft during the final bomb run. The bombardier no longer aimed the bombs, he aimed the entire aircraft. Once the bombardier identified the target and locked the Norden onto it, the bombsight calculated not just when to release the bombs, but how the aircraft needed to fly to reach the optimal release point. It sent signals to the autopilot, which adjusted the aircraft's heading and rate of turn to follow the bombsight's solution. This removed human reaction time from the equation and ensured the aircraft followed the precise course the computer calculated. The Norden Mark 15 bombsight that emerged from testing in 1931 represented the pinnacle of analog computing for its era. Weighing 50 pounds, the device was split into two main components. The stabilizer, mounted below and behind the bombardier's position, contained the gyroscopic platform and the mechanical computer. The sight head, positioned where the bombardier could access it, contained the optical telescope and the controls for target identification and tracking. These components connected through mechanical linkages and electrical wiring that allowed them to function as an integrated system. The device contained over 2,000 precisely machined parts, 61 ball bearings, manufactured to tolerances tighter than those used in fine Swiss watches, were crucial to the Norden's operation. These bearings had to be so precisely made that Norden established his own manufacturing plant to produce them, the Baden Company, because existing suppliers could not meet his specifications. The factory where these bearings were made still exists today, and in one of history's ironies, it is now part of a German ball-bearing conglomerate with headquarters in Schweinfurt, one of the German cities that Norden bombsights helped repeatedly attack during the war. The cost was extraordinary. Each Norden bombsight cost $14,000 to produce. For comparison, a B-17 Flying Fortress bomber, one of the most sophisticated aircraft of its era, cost $238,000. The bombsight represented 6% of the cost of the aircraft carrying it. For a single piece of equipment mounted in the nose, this was an unprecedented expense. It reflected both the device's complexity and the military's assessment of its strategic value. Testing under controlled conditions produced results that seemed to validate every prediction and justify every dollar spent. In October 1931, the Navy conducted comparative tests of the prototype Mark 15 against the older Mark 11 bombsight. The testing was rigorous, using identical aircraft, identical bombs, and identical target range to ensure fair comparison. The Mark 11, representing the previous generation of bombsight technology, achieved 23% direct hits against the test targets. This was considered acceptable performance for the era. The Mark 15 achieved 50% direct hits. It was not merely better. It was dramatically, transformatively better. The improvement was so significant that it changed fundamental assumptions about what aerial bombing could achieve. In April 1941, at Fort Benning, Georgia, the Army Air Corps conducted a demonstration that would become legendary in bombardier training. 4 Norden-equipped B-17 bombers targeted a simulated battleship measuring 600 feet by 105 feet. The target was painted on the ground to represent the dimensions of a capital ship. Over multiple bombing runs, 10 of 12 bombs hit within the target outline. Under ideal conditions, clear skies, unlimited visibility, no combat stress, known and stable wind conditions, stationary targets, properly calibrated equipment, and well-rested bombardiers who had practiced on the specific range the Norden demonstrated a circular error probable of 75 feet. This technical term meant that 50% of bombs dropped would land within a 75-foot radius of the aiming point. The other 50% would land farther away, but the median accuracy was 75 feet. From 20,000 feet, this was extraordinary accuracy. This was precision that made strategic bombing doctrine feasible. This was the figure that would echo through American military planning and propaganda for the next 4 years, becoming the foundation of claims about American technological superiority. Air Force information officers, tasked with building public and political support for strategic bombing, to subscribe and enable notifications into memorable imagery. It helps us continue. They claimed the Norden could drop a bomb into a pickle barrel from 20,000 feet. Some variations of the claim cited 30,000 feet. The Norden Company itself, recognizing the public relations value of this imagery, adopted the slogan enthusiastically. They used a Latin motto, Cupa fiat melior muriae, per Norden obibit, which loosely translated as, when better pickle barrels are built, Norden will hit them too. The phrase appeared in company literature and advertising after security was relaxed later in the war. The problem, which any competent physicist could have explained but which was conveniently ignored in the propaganda, was that from 20,000 feet, in a pickle barrel would be completely obscured by the Norden's 20-power telescope sight. The optics simply did not have sufficient magnification to resolve an object that small from that altitude. You could not even see a pickle barrel from 20,000 feet, much less hit one. The claim was physically impossible based on the bombsight's own specifications. But the claim served its purpose brilliantly. It provided a concrete, easily understood metaphor for a complex technology that few outside the military would ever see or understand. It justified the enormous expense of development and production, and it gave the American public confidence that their bombers would strike with surgical precision, destroying military targets while sparing innocent civilians. The security apparatus built around the Norden reflected the military's assessment of its value to national security and enemy intelligence. The device initially received a classification of secret, the second highest classification level, indicating that disclosure would endanger national security. This classification meant access was restricted to personnel with specific security clearances and a demonstrated need to know. Discussing the bombsight's capabilities or operation with unauthorized personnel was a criminal offense. While this classification was later reduced to confidential in 1936 to facilitate development and manufacturing, and eventually to restricted by November 1942, as hundreds of bombsights were being lost to enemy action. Operational security remained extreme throughout the war. Bombardier underwent extensive training not just on how to use the Norden, but on its importance to national security and the consequences of allowing it to fall into enemy hands. The training emphasized that bombardiers were being entrusted with one of America's most valuable military secrets. Some commanders, perhaps overzealous in their desire to impress upon young men the seriousness of their responsibility, instituted what became known as the Bombardier's Oath. These ceremonies varied by unit and base, but they generally involved bombardiers swearing to protect the bombsight with their lives if necessary and to destroy it before allowing it to fall into enemy hands. Some bombardiers reported being told that capture with an intact Norden would result in court-martial and possible execution. Navy regulations specified exact destruction procedures to be followed if aircraft capture appeared imminent. The instructions were precise. 2 rounds with a .45 caliber service pistol into the rate end mechanism, the portion containing the most sensitive computational components, and 1 round through the telescope to destroy the optical system. The assumption was that even a severely damaged Norden might provide useful intelligence to enemy technical analysts, so destruction had to be thorough. Some sources claim the Army developed a thermite bombsight destroyer device, essentially an incendiary grenade designed specifically for destroying the Norden. This device supposedly consisted of an 18-inch steel cylinder packed with 15 pounds of magnesium and oxidizer. When activated, it would burn at temperatures exceeding 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit, melting the Norden's precision components into slag. Whether such thermite destroyers were ever actually deployed remains unclear. Accidental ignition in flight would almost certainly destroy the aircraft, as a thermite reaction of that intensity could burn through aluminum fuselage structure in seconds. Bombardier would have needed to activate the device after a bailout order, but before actually leaving the aircraft, a sequence that seems improbable under combat conditions. The thermite destroyer may have existed as a prototype or proposal that never reached operational deployment, another element of the mythology that grew around the Norden. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. The rituals surrounding the Norden became as important as the device itself, a piece of security theatre that reinforced its mystique. At airbases across England and in the Pacific Theatre, bombardiers collected their bombsights from secure vaults before each mission. These vaults were hardened structures, often concrete bunkers with heavy steel doors and combination locks. Guards were posted 24 hours per day. Access logs documented every removal and return. Armed guards, typically military police carrying rifles or submachine guns, escorted the devices from the vaults to the aircraft. The bombsight remained covered with a canvas shroud during transport. The cover was not removed until after the aircraft was airborne. After landing from a mission, whether the mission was completed, aborted, or the aircraft returned early due to mechanical problems, the process reversed in exact sequence. The Bombardier covered the Norden before the aircraft engines shut down. Armed guards met the aircraft and retrieved the bombsight. They escorted it back to the vault, where it was logged in and secured. This ritual occurred thousands of times per day across dozens of airbases. It consumed significant manpower. Military police, who might have been used for other security functions instead, spent their time escorting bombsights back and forth. The ritual's contribution to actual security was questionable, but its psychological impact was significant. General Henry Hap Arnold, commanding general of the Army Air Forces, personally insisted that the Norden must always be covered from view during transport. This order applied even on American bases, far from any possible enemy observation. The logic was that maintaining absolute security discipline would prevent any possibility of compromise through casual observation. In practice, it contributed to a culture of secrecy that made the Norden seem far more mysterious and valuable than objective assessment might have warranted. This security theatre served multiple purposes beyond the ostensible goal of preventing enemy intelligence gathering. It reinforced to air crews that they possessed a weapon of strategic importance. Every time a bombardier went through the ritual of collecting his Norden from the vault, having it escorted by armed guards, and keeping it covered until airborne, he was reminded that he wielded technology that could change the course of the war. The ritual justified the enormous cost of development and production. If the military treated the Norden as extraordinarily valuable, then Congress and the public would accept the extraordinary expenditure on its production. The theatre contributed to the psychological warfare effort of making the enemy believe American technology was superior. Every escaped prisoner of war, every neutral observer, every intelligence source who witnessed the elaborate security around the Norden reported it to their handlers. This created an impression of technological sophistication that served American strategic interests, even if the technology itself did not perform as advertised. But behind this elaborate performance, something had gone catastrophically wrong, and the Germans knew about it before most Americans did. The story of that knowledge begins in the summer of 1937, when German military intelligence identified the Norden bombsight as a high-priority intelligence target. The Abwehr, Germany's military intelligence service, was engaged in systematic efforts to acquire American military technology. They had operatives in American defense plants, sympathetic German Americans who could be recruited or coerced into cooperation, and sophisticated networks for moving stolen information back to Germany. The Luftwaffe, Germany's air force, was particularly interested in American bombsight development. Germany was developing its own precision bombing capabilities, and Luftwaffe technical staff wanted to know what the Americans had achieved. If American technology was superior, Germany needed to either steal it or develop countermeasures. Initial queries to German intelligence operatives in New York produced negative results. The Norden Company maintained good security. Access to the bombsight designs was restricted. No one in the existing German spy network had the clearances or access necessary to obtain the plans. Then, in September 1937, a routine shipment of documents arrived at Abwehr headquarters in Hamburg. Hidden among various industrial and technical drawings were unidentified bombsight schematics. Attached was a note indicating the source worked at the Norden plant at 80 Lafayette Street in Manhattan and was eager to meet with a German intelligence officer in New York. This was an intelligence windfall of the highest order. The Abwehr moved quickly to exploit it. The source was Hermann Wilhelm Lang. 19 years old when he immigrated to the United States in 1927, Lang was a skilled German engineer seeking better opportunities than Weimar Germany offered. He had technical training and quickly found work in American industry. By 1934, he had obtained a position with the Carl L. Norden Corporation and had become a naturalized American citizen. From an external perspective, Lang appeared to be exactly the type of immigrant America attracted: skilled, hardworking, eager to assimilate. He learned English, he married, he seemed to be building an American life. But Lang had a secret that American security services did not discover. Between 1923 and 1927, during Germany's turbulent Weimar period, Lang had served as a Nazi stormtrooper. He had been involved with the Nazi Party during its early years, before it achieved power. When economic conditions made Germany intolerable, he had emigrated, but his political sympathies remained with German nationalism. In his own mind, Lang was not a traitor. He was a patriot serving his true homeland while temporarily residing in America. Lang took a job with Carl Norden and was soon assigned work making gyroscopes for the Norden bombsight. This was sensitive work requiring security clearances, but Lang's naturalized citizenship and clean American record allowed him to obtain the necessary approvals. He did good work. His supervisors praised his precision and attention to detail. He learned the intricacies of the bombsight's mechanisms thoroughly. He understood not just how to manufacture components, but how the entire system functioned, and he had access to the complete technical drawings because he needed them to manufacture parts to the correct specifications. In November 1937, Lang began systematically copying the bombsight plans. He could not simply steal the drawings, as their absence would be noticed immediately. Instead, he copied them by hand, creating detailed blueprints from memory and from notes he made during work. This required extraordinary technical knowledge and drafting skill. Lang possessed both. Over several weeks, he produced a complete set of plans showing the Norden's internal mechanisms, the mathematical principles behind its computer, the specifications for its precision components, and the procedures for its operation and maintenance. These drawings were smuggled to Germany via ocean liner. The exact mechanism remains unclear from declassified records, but it likely involved concealment in cargo or delivery to German intelligence cutouts in New York, who then forwarded them through diplomatic push. By early 1938, complete Norden plans were in the hands of Luftwaffe technical intelligence analysts in Germany. In 1938, Lang travelled to Germany for what he characterized to his American employer as a family vacation. In reality, he met with Oberst Nikolaus Ritter of the Abwehr, the intelligence officer running German espionage operations in the United States. He also, according to some accounts, met with Reichsmarschall Hermann Göring himself, Hitler's second-in-command and the head of the Luftwaffe. Lang received initially $1,500 for the stolen plans, with some accounts claiming the total payment eventually reached $3,500. Later, he received 10,000 Reichsmarks for his consultation services. This was significant money, but Lang apparently was not primarily motivated by payment. He viewed his espionage as service to Germany, with payment being recognition of that service rather than the motivation for it. Lang spent several weeks in Germany, working with Luftwaffe technical experts. The stolen drawings, detailed as they were, did not capture every aspect of the Norden's operation. Lang reconstructed from memory the details the drawings had not captured. He explained the calibration procedures, the maintenance requirements, the operational techniques that made the bombsight function effectively. He provided information that would allow German engineers to build working copies and, perhaps more importantly, to understand the Norden's capabilities and limitations. The Germans built complete mock-ups of the Norden bombsight based on Lang's information. These were not merely study models. They were functional replicas built to the same specifications as the American originals. German engineers tested these replicas extensively, analyzing their performance under various conditions. They compared the Norden to their own Lot-Fernrohr 7, the Lotfe 7, which had been in development for years under the direction of the Carl Zeiss Optical Company. The German assessment of the Norden, conducted by engineers who had no bureaucratic investment in inflating or deflating its capabilities, was both thorough and devastating to American assumptions. Yes, the Norden was sophisticated. Yes, it represented advanced engineering and considerable ingenuity. The mechanical computer was impressive. The gyroscopic stabilization was well designed. The integration with the autopilot was clever. From a pure engineering standpoint, German analysts acknowledged that Norden had created an elegant solution to the problem of calculating bomb trajectories in real time. But from an operational standpoint, the assessment was far less favorable. Its 2,000 precision parts required manufacturing tolerances that would strain German industrial capacity. The 61 ball bearings alone required specialized production techniques. In wartime conditions, when factories might be damaged and supply chains disrupted, producing Nordens in quantity would be extremely difficult. The device had too many small moving parts requiring precise tolerances and careful maintenance. Under combat conditions, with vibration, temperature extremes, and rough handling, maintaining those tolerances would be nearly impossible. The Norden was difficult to operate effectively. Training a bombardier to proficiency required extensive time and practice. German military doctrine emphasized systems that could be operated by personnel with minimal specialized training, reflecting realistic assumptions about the quality of personnel available during wartime mobilization. Most importantly, German testing suggested the Norden was seemingly no more accurate than Germany's own bombsight under realistic conditions. The 75-foot circular error probable Americans cited were achievable only under ideal testing conditions that bore little resemblance to combat operations. The Luftwaffe made a strategic decision based on this technical assessment. They would not attempt to produce German copies of the Norden. The device was impractical for their purposes. The complexity and manufacturing challenges outweighed any potential advantages. Germany had already committed to a different bombing doctrine, one that emphasized dive bombing and close-air support for ground forces rather than high-altitude precision bombing of strategic targets. The Junkers Ju-87 Stuka dive bomber, capable of delivering ordnance with reasonable accuracy by diving directly at the target, fit German military doctrine better than any bombsight, no matter how sophisticated. This decision would prove strategically significant in ways neither side fully anticipated at the time. Germany's focus on tactical bombing left them without an effective strategic bombing capability to attack British or later Soviet industry. They could not strike targets deep in enemy territory with the kind of sustained bombing campaigns that American and British forces would eventually mount against Germany. But more relevant to our story, German technical analysts knew from their own hands-on testing that the Norden's legendary accuracy was just that, a legend based on optimistic extrapolation from ideal testing conditions. Meanwhile, Hermann Lang returned to his job in the United States and continued his normal life, at least on the surface. But he remained active in German intelligence operations. He continued feeding military information to the Germans through his involvement with the Duquesne spy ring, one of the most successful German espionage operations ever mounted in the United States. The ring, named for Frederick Duquesne, included 33 agents working in various capacities to steal American military and industrial secrets. They operated with considerable sophistication, using dead drops, coded communications, and a network of cutouts to insulate operatives from each other. The FBI, under the direction of J. Edgar Hoover, had been tracking German intelligence activities in the United States since the late 1930s. By 1940, they had identified some members of the Duquesne Ring, but lacked evidence for prosecution. The breakthrough came through William G. Siebold, a German-American who had been recruited by the Abwehr during a visit to Germany, but who instead reported the recruitment to American authorities. Siebold became a double agent, pretending to work for Germany while actually working for the FBI. He allowed the FBI to monitor his communications with other German agents, gradually mapping the entire Duquesne network. On June 29, 1941, the FBI arrested 33 members of the Duquesne spy ring in coordinated raids across New York and New Jersey. It was the largest espionage bust in American history to that point. J. Edgar Hoover personally announced the arrests to the press, calling it the greatest roundup of enemy agents in United States history. The announcement was timed to maximize publicity, with Hoover providing details to radio commentator Walter Winchell for his evening broadcast. Hermann Lang was among those arrested. He was charged with espionage, specifically with stealing the Norden bombsight plans and providing them to Germany. Lang's trial in federal court revealed the full extent of his espionage. Fellow ring members testified about his activities. The FBI presented evidence of his meetings with Ritter in Germany, his payments from German intelligence, and the mechanism by which he had stolen and transmitted the bombsight plans. Lang pleaded not guilty, maintaining that he had done nothing wrong and that he was serving Germany, not betraying America. The jury disagreed. Lang was convicted of espionage and sentenced to 18 years in federal prison. He served his sentence at various federal facilities until 1950, when he was released and immediately deported to Germany. The timing of Lang's arrest and the public nature of his trial meant that American military authorities knew by mid-1941 that the Germans had complete Norden bombsight plans. They knew the device's secrets had been compromised before the United States had even entered the war. The arrest occurred in June 1941. Pearl Harbor would not occur until December. When American bombers finally entered combat in Europe in 1942, military intelligence was fully aware that the Germans had possessed detailed Norden information for 5 years, yet the elaborate security apparatus continued. Bombardiers still swore oaths to protect the bombsight with their lives. Armed guards still escorted bombsights to and from aircraft in elaborate rituals. The classification officially remained in effect, though gradually reduced. The propaganda about pickle-barrel accuracy continued and even intensified. The American public was told the Norden was a war-winning super weapon whose secrets must be protected at all costs. Why did this security theatre persist when its premise had been invalidated? The answer reveals much about military bureaucracies, classified programs, and the nature of propaganda during wartime. First, admitting the compromise would have undermined public confidence in American security and intelligence services. The story would have been devastating. A naturalized citizen with Nazi sympathies had walked out of a defense plant with America's most important military secret and handed it to Germany years before the war began. This would have raised uncomfortable questions about security screening, about the wisdom of employing German immigrants in sensitive positions, about the competence of counterintelligence services. Military and political leaders chose to keep the compromise classified, limiting knowledge to a small circle of officials. Second, the Norden bombsight had become more valuable as a symbol than as a piece of technology. It represented American commitment to precision rather than indiscriminate destruction. It justified strategic bombing doctrine to political leaders concerned about civilian casualties. It provided concrete evidence that American technological superiority would win the war. These symbolic functions remained valuable even after the device's technical secrets were known to the enemy. Admitting that the superweapon was neither super nor secret would have undermined the entire strategic bombing program that had been built around it. Third, bureaucratic momentum is extraordinarily difficult to reverse. Thousands of people were employed in the Norden's production, security, training, and maintenance. Procedures had been established, Regulations had been written, careers had been invested in the program. Admitting that the security apparatus was protecting a device whose secrets were already compromised would have required dismantling this entire structure, retraining personnel, revising doctrine, and acknowledging that enormous resources had been wasted. Organizations, particularly military organizations, resist such admissions. Fourth, there was always the possibility, however slim, that maintaining the security apparatus would lead the Germans to believe their espionage had not been detected. If the Americans continued treating the Norden as a critical secret after learning of Lang's espionage, German intelligence might conclude their operation had remained undiscovered. This could provide opportunities for feeding disinformation or identifying other German agents through counterintelligence operations. So the propaganda continued. The security rituals persisted, and bombardiers like Staff Sergeant Robert Henderson continued aiming at German factories, believing they wielded technology that gave them a decisive advantage, unaware that their targets had been defended by men who understood the Norden's limitations better than the bombardiers themselves did. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.